It began in a dying region of space known as the Ashfall Corridor, a place where stars flickered like they were suffocating, a place where even light traveled slower as if afraid to move forward, a place where patrol ships vanished without a trace and distress calls ended in soft, broken static that felt like a whisper from someone already dead, and every species in the galaxy feared the same name. The Mourners, a silent force no one had seen. No one had fought. No one had survived. Their arrival left no crater, no burning cities, no floating wreckage. They did not destroy the way normal invaders did but wiped existence clean, deleting planets as if the universe itself erased a mistake. For years, rumors traveled through frightened fleets. Colonies that vanished overnight, stations that turned to dust, children crying in the dark before fading into nothing, and now their next target had been found. A small refugee ship drifting near the edge of the corridor, carrying only children and a few caretakers trying to escape war, and when the first silent distress pulse went out, most races turned away, too terrified to enter the cursed region. Empires who once boasted of their fleets now acted blind, pretending they never heard the call, and mercenary ships muted their radios to avoid responsibility. Yet the signal traveled onward through broken satellites and dying stars until it reached a planet the galaxy had long forgotten, Earth. Inside humanity's deep command, hidden beneath an ocean trench and surrounded by layers of steel and silence, the alarms erupted like thunder and lights flashed red across giant screens as officers froze, staring at the fragile message. It was weak, damaged, almost unreadable, but one sound cut through every mind like a knife. The crying voices of children begging for help, tiny echoes filled with fear and confusion, calling for someone, anyone, to save them. For 3 long seconds the room fell completely still. No one breathed, no one spoke, as if the entire species was listening together. Then humanity moved with a speed the galaxy had forgotten they were capable of. The deep iron doors of battle command unlocked for the first time in 6 centuries, releasing cold air from sealed chambers where ancient machines had slept in darkness. Warning sirens echoed through underground tunnels as dormant engines hummed awake after hundreds of silent years. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war that never came suddenly stood straight, eyes sharp, hearts burning. Earth had tried to stay peaceful, quiet, isolated, believing the galaxy didn't need their strength anymore, and the galaxy believed it too. They thought humans had grown soft, uninterested, small, a quiet species that lived in the shadow of larger empires. But Earth's silence was never weakness. It was discipline, the discipline of a species that knew what war truly meant. It was patience, the patience of warriors who understood when to wait and when to strike. It was control, the control of a civilization that once nearly broke itself to pieces and swore never to unleash its rage unless the innocent had no other protector. Now, listening to the cries from the refugee ship, humanity understood there was no one else coming. Aliens had abandoned those children. The mourners were already closing in. And Earth refused to let them die alone. Across the oceans, massive pressure doors cracked open as hidden naval elevators rose toward the surface, carrying steel giants once believed to be myths. The first shadow appeared beneath the water, a colossal warship, black as night, built with metals the galaxy never learned to create. Its engines glowed with ancient Terran energy, humming like a heartbeat as it rose toward the sky. From deserts, mountains, and frozen poles, more ships awakened, launching into the air with a force that made clouds tremble. Old commanders who thought they would die without ever seeing a real battle placed their hands on their hearts as the fleet rose, whispering, "We are needed again." In the cities, civilians watched in awe as the sky filled with silver trails and thunder roared across continents. Children pointed at the glowing engines, mothers cried knowing their sons and daughters were boarding ships that might never return, and old veterans, long retired, stood on rooftops saluting the warships streaking into the heavens. Meanwhile, in deep command, Admiral Rowan Hale stepped into the main war room, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved from stone, his eyes cold with the knowledge that he was about to lead humanity into the darkest region of space. He looked around at his officers and said in a voice that carried across every speaker, "Prepare the fleet. We answer the call." A wave of determination spread through every crew member. Pilots rushed to hangars. Engineers slammed reactors into overdrive. Medics prepared for casualties. And in the command core of the lead dreadnought, the AI known as Auron activated for the first time in centuries. Its voice calm and chilling as it said, "Admiral Hale, long-range weapons online. Stealth drives charging. All systems green. Battle fleet ready." Outside, the galaxy watched from a distance, confused, alarmed, curious, as sensors across dozens of worlds detected an impossible sight. An entire human battle fleet rising from Earth. Many laughed at first. They believed humans were harmless. They believed humanity had no real military power left. They believed Earth was a small blue dot pretending to be relevant. But as the first Terran dreadnought broke past the atmosphere, the laughter died. The ship was bigger than anything the galaxy had built in 1,000 years. Its hull glowed with ancient runic patterns. Its engines pulsed like living stars. And its silhouette alone made space tremble. Reports spread quickly across the galaxy's networks. Earth was deploying something called the Eternal Fleet, a name so old most species believed it was a legend. But legends often hid truth, and the truth was terrifying. Humanity had built these warships during the Great Silence, during the time they had disappeared from galactic politics, during the centuries when everyone wondered why Earth had gone so quiet. They were not hiding. They were preparing. Preparing for something like this. Preparing for a threat the galaxy pretended wasn't real. Preparing for an enemy like the Mourners. As humanity's fleet formed up in orbit, Admiral Hale stood on the bridge staring at the star map of the HFY corridor where the refugee ship still drifted alone. He thought of the children crying for help. He thought of the colonies that vanished. He thought of the shadows that erased worlds. And he whispered, barely audible, "Not today." The fleet engines ignited in synchronized brilliance. Space warped. Time bent. And in a blinding flash of blue light, humanity returned to the battlefield after 600 years. Deep inside the HFY corridor, where darkness was thick like smoke and gravity felt wrong, the Mourners moved closer to their new prey. Their presence made the metal of the refugee ship bend and groan. Lights flickered. Air thinned. The children inside huddled together, crying softly, not knowing if anyone would come. And then, for the first time in countless years, something else entered the corridor. The shadows paused, sensing a new energy, a new heartbeat, something unlike any species they had consumed before. And as humanity's battle fleet tore through the dark like a burning spear, the universe held its breath, because the humans were not arriving quietly. They were arriving with fury, with purpose, with the promise that no child would die today, and the Mourners felt something they had not felt in centuries. Feared as humanity's battle fleet cut through the choking darkness of the HFY corridor. Every ship felt the pressure of an unseen weight pressing against their hulls like cold fingers trying to crush the metal from outside, and even inside the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Rowan Hale felt something strange. A faint trembling in the air as if someone was quietly breathing inside the walls, watching him. The corridor was not just dark. It was alive with a presence that whispered inside the minds of the crew. Tiny voices that tried to plant fear deep in their hearts, showing them memories they tried to forget. Young pilots saw images of their families crying. Old soldiers heard the last words of their fallen comrades. And the navigator, Lieutenant Marin, closed her eyes tightly as she felt a cold shadow whisper her name inside her ear though no one stood near her. And yet through all this haunting pressure, humanity held their formation strong without breaking. The deeper the fleet moved, the thicker the darkness grew, swallowing stars, choking signals, bending radar like rubber, forcing human engineers to manually adjust scanners every few seconds just to keep the path visible. It was as if the corridor was trying to confuse them, pull them back, make them turn around. But Admiral Hale refused to slow down, his voice steady as he ordered, "Maintain course. No fear. Not today." Far ahead, the faint blinking of the refugee ship's dying distress beacon appeared on their screens, a small trembling dot surrounded by thick waves of unnatural energy. Hale's chest tightened as he saw it. Those children were still alive, but the Mourners were closing in. The ship's audio systems began picking up faint echoes, soft crying, long whispers, a low humming sound that seemed to come from nowhere. Soldiers looked at each other with rising panic, wondering if the children were calling or if the darkness itself was playing tricks on them. One Marine wiped tears from his eyes even though he didn't know why. Another clutched his helmet, breathing fast as old trauma resurfaced unexpectedly. The mourners. Power was emotional warfare, piercing into the human soul, twisting hope into sorrow, strength into weakness, courage into shaking hands. And then it happened. The lights dimmed for a second, and everyone on the bridge froze. They felt something move. Not outside the ship, inside. A shadow crawled across the ceiling like liquid darkness, sliding along the metal silently before melting into the wall. The whole fleet felt it at the same time. Screens flickered. Engines shuddered. The darkness was reaching inside their minds, testing them, tasting them. Oren, the ship's AI, spoke in a sharp voice, psychic wave detected. Crew emotional stability dropping. Increasing cognitive shielding. A soft blue pulse washed through the ship, giving the humans a moment of relief, a moment to breathe again, but Rowan knew it was temporary. The mourners were not attacking physically yet. They were studying the humans, examining them like predators circling prey. As the fleet approached the refugee ship, the darkness thickened until the view outside looked like ink smeared across a window. The small ship drifted lifelessly, spinning slowly in the void, its engines dead, its hull cracked, and its lights flickering weakly like candles in a storm. Admiral Hale stepped closer to the main screen, his voice quiet but filled with emotion as he whispered, "Hold on, we're here now." The Marines prepared boarding gear, breathing hard but steady, knowing they were about to enter a nightmare. On the ship's intercom, a soft sound crackled through, the crying of a single child, so faint, so weak, that it felt like a dagger inside every soldier's chest. Humanity had heard many cries before, but this one was different. It carried hopelessness, the kind that breaks even the strongest hearts, and something inside every crew member snapped. Fear melted. Doubt vanished. The emotional torture that the mourners tried to push inside them suddenly hardened into something stronger, something unstoppable, something the galaxy feared, human anger. Admiral Hale's hands tightened into fists as he ordered, "Boarding teams, move." And with that, drop pods launched from the fleet like burning stars, diving into the darkness toward the broken refugee ship. As the pods cut through the corridor, the shadows swirled around them, trying to slow them down, whispering into their helmets, showing them visions of failure, but humanity did not break. Inside one pod, a young Marine named Danny wiped the tears she didn't remember crying, whispering to herself, "It's okay. They're just kids, we're coming." When the pods finally slammed into the refugee ship's hull, a loud metallic scream echoed through the corridor, and for a split second, even the darkness pulled back as if startled by the humans' sudden arrival. And in that moment, the mourners realized something they had not felt in centuries. This prey did not fear them. This prey was stepping into the dark willingly. This prey was coming for the children. And that changed everything. When the human Marines forced open the hatch of the refugee ship, a wave of cold air rushed out so sharp and heavy that it felt like stepping into the breath of something dead, and their helmet lights flickered violently as if the darkness inside was trying to swallow the light before it could touch the walls. The corridor ahead was silent, so silent that even the sound of their boots felt wrong, echoing in a way that didn't match the space around them, almost like the ship itself was breathing slowly, waiting for something to happen. As they pushed deeper, the air grew thick with a strange humming sound that crawled through their ears and into their thoughts, bringing flashes of memories that did not belong to them. One Marine suddenly gasped as he saw an image of his mother from childhood, crying and calling his name even though she had passed away years ago. Another dropped to one knee, shaking as he heard laughter from someone he lost in a war long ago. The mourners had filled the ship with emotional traps, weaving painful visions into every shadow, trying to weaken the Marines before they reached the children. But the humans kept moving, teeth clenched, breaths shaking, hearts burning with the memory of that small cry they heard earlier, the fragile sob of a scared child. Lieutenant Danny took point, her voice steady though tears rolled down her cheeks without her permission, and she whispered, "Don't look at the shadows, just listen to my voice." As they reached the central chamber, the Marines froze. Their helmet lights revealed row after row of strange glowing cocoons, floating a few inches above the ground like weightless shells made of mist and energy, and inside each cocoon lay a child, eyes closed, breathing weakly, trapped in a state between life and something else. The sight pierced every human heart. These were not prisoners. They were victims. The mourners were not killing them, They were feeding on their fear, draining their emotions, drinking their memories, turning their terror into energy. One small girl inside a cocoon twitched in her sleep, her tiny hand pressing against the energy barrier as if reaching for something that wasn't there, and Danny's breath broke as she whispered, "Oh God, they're still alive." The Marines moved quickly, using human tech to break the energy fields one by one, and as each cocoon cracked, the children inside gasped and clung to the nearest Marine, shaking, crying without sound, too weak to speak. One boy opened his eyes and stared at Danny, his voice barely a whisper as he said, They said you wouldn't come." Danny knelt and pulled him close, her voice trembling as she answered, "We're here now. You're safe." But before relief could settle, the lights above flickered violently, and a deep rumble vibrated through the ship like a monstrous heartbeat awakening. Admiral Hale, watching from the flagship through helmet feeds, felt his blood run cold. He recognized that sound. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't the hull. It was the mourners themselves, reacting. The moment the last cocoon opened and the final child was freed, the darkness inside the refugee ship shifted like a living ocean pulling itself together. Shadows crawled across the walls, twisting into long shapes that moved with hunger. The temperature dropped so fast frost formed on the Marines' visors. The children shivered uncontrollably. A deep, broken whisper filled the air, not spoken by a mouth but vibrating through the entire ship like the voice of something ancient and furious. The mourners had realized their food was being taken. The shadows dropped from the ceiling in long tendrils, swirling, merging, rising, forming a massive shape that blocked the corridor behind them. The Marines backed up instinctively, guns raised, shielding the children behind their armor. Danny stared into the shifting mass of living darkness and felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst, but she refused to step back. The shadow tilted its featureless head toward them, and every Marine felt a wave of emotions crash inside them. Fear, sadness, despair so deep that their knees nearly buckled. But then something incredible happened. The child holding Danny's hand squeezed her fingers and whispered, "Don't let it take me." And that one tiny voice broke the mourner's spell like shattering glass. Fear turned into fire. Pain turned into rage. Marines stood taller. Danny wiped her tears and raised her weapon, eyes burning with something the darkness had never tasted before, human defiance. She whispered, "You can't have them." At that exact moment, the flagship's sensors screamed. The mourners had detected the humans. They were coming. For the first time in thousands of years, the predators of the HFY corridor were about to face something they had not faced since the birth of the galaxy, humanity fighting for its children. And the corridor itself trembled. The moment the shadow creature blocked the corridor, the entire refugee ship groaned like it was being squeezed by something colossal from the outside, and every light flickered in a slow, dying pattern as if the darkness was swallowing electricity itself, making the Marines tighten their formation around the trembling children who clung to their armor like lifelines. The shadow did not move at first. It simply stood there, tall and shapeless, its body flowing like liquid smoke, twisting into long tendrils that stretched across the ceiling and floor, and even without eyes the Marines felt it staring at them, studying them, tasting their fear in the air like a predator smelling warm blood in the cold void. The children huddled closer, small fingers gripping armored gloves, trying their best not to cry, but the darkness pressed into their chests, pushing hopelessness into their hearts, making some of them whimper softly. Lieutenant Danny could feel her own lungs tightening as if someone was squeezing them, a wave of sorrow trying to break her from the inside, but she refused to give in. She looked at the tiny faces around her, pale, scared, fragile, and she forced herself to stand taller, whispering in a shaking voice, "Stay behind us. Stay strong, humans don't leave their children." The creature reacted instantly, its body rippling as if insulted by her words, and then it lunged, not physically, but mentally, sending a blast of psychic force through the corridor so strong that several Marines dropped to one knee, choking on their breath as memories they fought to forget flooded their minds. Danny saw her brother, the one who died in the old solar war, calling for her with blood on his hands. Another Marine saw the face of a wife he lost years ago. A third saw himself failing as a soldier, hearing voices whisper, "You can't save them. You can't save anyone." The creature fed on these emotions, growing larger with each second, its shadow stretching like a monstrous wing ready to smother them. And then, Right when the Marines were about to be overwhelmed, something changed. One child, barely 6 years old, stepped forward despite shaking violently, his small hand reaching out to touch Danny's arm as he said in a trembling whisper, "Please, don't leave us, please." That one voice, so pure, so scared, so painfully honest, broke the psychic attack like shattering glass. The Marines inhaled sharply as if waking from a nightmare. Their vision cleared. Their minds snapped back into focus. And suddenly the darkness wasn't as suffocating as before because now something stronger than fear filled the air: human resolve. Danny stood straight, wiping her tears with the back of her glove, and whispered, "We're not dying here." The creature heard her. And it screamed. The sound was not a sound at all. It was a vibration that tore through the walls, through their bones, through their minds, a silent roar that made lights explode and metal warp, and the entire ship shook as if struck by a meteor. Admiral Hale, watching through the visor feeds on the flagship, felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was the enemy that erased planets. And now it was fully awake. The shadow surged forward, stretching into 100 tendrils aimed at the children first, as if trying to reclaim what it had started consuming. But the Marines moved like lightning, forming a tight circle around the kids, firing pulse rounds into the swirling mass. The blasts tore small pieces of darkness apart, but they reformed instantly, twisting like angry smoke. The creature attacked again, faster, more violent, slamming into their shields with enough force to crack armor plates. One Marine was thrown into the wall so hard he coughed blood but still shouted, "Keep firing! Keep firing!" Danny grabbed two children, pushing them behind her as she fired again and again, her voice cracking as she yelled, "Stay behind me. Don't look at it." But the creature reacted to every emotion, every heartbeat, every tiny flicker of fear. The darker their fear grew, the stronger it became. And then, something unexpected happened. The children began holding hands. One by one, small trembling fingers connected, forming a chain of fragile courage. They squeezed each other's hands tightly, eyes shut, tears falling, but not letting go. Danny felt the shift immediately, like a sudden warmth cutting through the cold. The creature felt it too, and recoiled. For the first time, the darkness bent backward. Admiral Hale whispered on the comm, almost in disbelief, "It's weakening. They're weakening it." It wasn't human weapons hurting the creature, it was human emotion. Not fear, not sorrow, but connection, hope, unity. The thing the mourners never understood, never consumed, never expected. The creature screamed again, its shadowy body splitting into cracks of flickering static as if losing form. The corridor lights briefly brightened. The Marines steadied. And Danny stepped forward, placing herself between the monster and the children, staring into the shifting mass with a voice full of fire and shaking fury as she said, "You don't get to touch them again." For a heartbeat, the creature hesitated. Then the entire ship trembled from a massive force approaching from outside. A deep alarm blared in Danny's helmet. Admiral Hale shouted through the comm, "Everyone brace. Something is coming. Something big." The Marines tightened their circle. The children clung to them. The creature twisted violently, panicking now as the temperature dropped instantly, frost racing across the walls. And then the hull outside screamed like metal tearing apart under enormous pressure. The mourners were arriving. The true fight was about to begin. The moment the hull of the refugee ship screamed like twisting metal, every Marine felt their blood freeze because that sound didn't come from the shadow creature inside. It came from something far, far bigger outside, something pressing into the ship like a giant claw trying to break through, and the lights across the ceiling burst into sparks as the entire vessel jolted violently, making the children fall to their knees and cling to the Marines with terrified cries that stabbed through every soldier's heart like burning needles. Admiral Hale's voice cut sharply through the comms, warning them that multiple massive energy signatures had appeared around the ship, an entire swarm of mourners, circling like wolves closing around a wounded animal. The Marines felt the air shift as the shadow creature inside suddenly collapsed in on itself, shrinking away as if called by something stronger, something older, something far more dangerous, and the darkness around them thickened like smoke filling the lungs. A deep vibration thrummed through the walls, not physical, not mechanical, but emotional. A wave of despair so heavy it knocked two Marines to the ground with hands pressed over their hearts, struggling to breathe as if drowning in memories of failure. Danny grabbed the nearest child, pulling him close as she forced her voice to stay steady, whispering, "Don't listen. Don't let it inside." But the mourners didn't attack physically. No, they pushed into minds first, pouring nightmares into every human heart. One child began sobbing, "I want my mom. I want to go home." And Danny felt herself break inside, the world blurring as the boy buried his face in her armor, shaking uncontrollably. Then the floor trembled again, harder this time, and a long crack ripped across the corridor wall as the external pressure intensified, the metal whining as invisible claws tore at the hull. On the flagship, Admiral Hale stood frozen, watching sensor readings spike into levels he had never seen. Levels that didn't even exist on human charts. Oren's voice finally trembled for the first time. "Admiral, something ancient is approaching." Back inside the refugee ship, the Marines felt the darkness change. It wasn't just a creature now, it was a presence, a colossal mind descending on them, brushing against their thoughts like a cold hand dragging across their souls. The older Marines, battle-hardened, disciplined, felt their knees weaken as their deepest regrets were dragged to the surface. One saw the face of the man he failed to save in the solar wars. Another saw the child he never got to meet. A third heard the voice of a dying friend whisper, "Why didn't you protect me?" The creature outside was feeding on them, trying to tear them apart from the inside, and the corridor grew colder, darker, heavier. Danny felt herself slipping, her heartbeat slowing, her vision blurring, as a whisper crawled into her mind. A whisper that sounded like her dead brother calling her name from the void. She almost answered. She almost let go. But then, a small hand touched her glove again. The same little boy, eyes full of tears but burning with desperate hope, whispered in a shaky, broken voice, "Please, you promised you wouldn't leave us, you said we're safe." And those words hit her harder than any enemy could. Danny snapped back to herself, inhaling sharply as she grabbed the child and held him against her chest like a shield against the darkness itself. Something inside her reignited, anger so fierce it felt like fire punching through her ribs. She shouted at the Marines, her voice cracking yet filled with raw power, "Get up. They are scared because we're stronger than them. Stand up." Something incredible happened. The Marines did. Slowly, painfully, shaking, bleeding, but they stood, because a child believed in them. The darkness shuddered, startled by the sudden emotional spike. For the first time, the psychic assaults weakened. A spark of light flickered in the corridor. The mourners responded instantly. Boom! The entire ship shook as an enormous shadow slammed onto the outer hull, denting the metal inward like something was trying to crush the ship like an eggshell. Screams erupted from the children. The corridor lights exploded in a rain of sparks. The shadow creature inside reformed, surging in fury, its body twisting into a massive form with claws of pure darkness reaching for the Marines. "Brace!" Danny shouted, raising her rifle, tears streaking down her face. The attack landed like a tidal wave of black fire, throwing Marines backward, slamming them into walls, causing armor plates to crack. Danny hit the deck so hard her vision flashed white, but she refused to fall, pushing herself upright with blood dripping from her lip as she pulled the children behind her. Outside, the flagship sensors finally identified the massive presence. Oren's voice broke through the comms, filled with dread. "Admiral, the Mourner Prime has arrived. The largest, the oldest, the one that erased whole civilizations." Admiral Hale froze for one single breath, and then roared, "All ships, open fire now." The battle outside exploded with blinding light as humanity's battle fleet unleashed everything they had. The corridor lit up like a star being born. The refugee ship shook under the pressure as shockwaves rippled through the structure. Danny shielded the kids as debris fell around them. The shadow creature screamed, its body splitting apart under the sudden emotional backlash of human resistance and the external bombardment. But even weakened, even wounded, it reformed with a snarl of rage. And for the first time, Danny saw the truth in its shifting mass: fear. The darkness was afraid of them. Afraid of humans. Afraid of the bond they shared. afraid of the one weapon humans had that the mourners could never consume: hope. The creature lunged again, desperate, frantic, wild. Dani planted her feet, raised her weapon, and whispered to the children behind her, "Close your eyes." Then she faced the monster with fire in her voice as she screamed, "Come on then." The war had officially begun. The moment the creature lunged again, the entire refugee ship shook like it was caught between two collapsing worlds, and Dani barely had time to pull the nearest child aside before the shadow's claws sliced through the air with a hiss that felt like ice carving through flesh. The darkness missing her by inches but tearing deep gouges into the metal wall behind her, sending sparks raining onto the terrified children whose screams echoed through the suffocating corridor. Outside, the battle between humanity's fleet and the Mourner Prime grew so violent that shockwaves rippled through the hull, throwing Marines off balance as lightning-like cracks of energy flickered across the walls each time a Terran warship fired its cannons. Admiral Hale stood on the flagship's bridge with sweat rolling down his forehead, his heart pounding as the Mourner Prime's enormous shadow form wrapped itself around several human dreadnoughts, squeezing them like toys while the ships groaned under the crushing pressure. "Hold the line!" Hale shouted, gripping the rail so hard his knuckles turned white. But Oren warned him that the psychic attacks were intensifying, spreading across the entire fleet, making seasoned captains cry silently as memories of lost loved ones and old failures poured into their minds like poison. Back inside the refugee ship, the Marines pushed back against the inner shadow creature with every ounce of strength left in them, firing pulse rounds that ripped holes through the darkness only for it to reform again with a furious scream. And Dani felt her muscles burn, her arms shaking, her lungs pulling sharp cold air with every breath as she refused to let the monster get even 1 inch closer to the children huddled behind her. "I won't let you touch them," she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion, and for a moment the creature faltered, its form flickering like a candle afraid of its own flame. But then it responded with violence, slamming the floor with a psychic shockwave that knocked every Marine to the ground, weapons skidding across the hallway. Dani hit the metal hard, her helmet cracking, her vision blurring into a mix of darkness and white noise as the monster leaned toward her, its shifting face only inches from her visor, whispering inside her mind with a voice that sounded like her dead brother. "You can't save them. You never save anyone." Her heart lurched painfully, tears breaking free as memories she had buried deep. Memories of that day, that explosion, that moment she couldn't reach him, flooded her mind like a drowning ocean. The children behind her screamed her name, but their voices felt distant, fading, swallowed by the creature's crushing emotional assault. Dani's breathing slowed. Her hands shook. She felt herself slipping, losing, failing, until a tiny hand touched her boot. She blinked through the blur. The same small boy from earlier crawled to her despite trembling violently, tears streaming down his face as he cried, "Please, please don't leave us. You're the only one we have." Those words hit harder than any psychic attack. Dani inhaled sharply as something deep inside her, something raw, powerful, human, ignited like a star exploding. She forced her shaking arm upward, grabbed her weapon, and with a scream filled with more emotion than the creature had ever heard in its existence, she fired point-blank into its core, a blast so bright and so fierce that the shadow recoiled violently, splitting into jagged shards of darkness that sizzled in the air before pulling back in pain and shock. The corridor brightened for a moment, and the Marines began to rise, battered but alive, helping the children stand as Dani pushed herself upright with fire in her eyes. Outside, Hale saw the same shift. The Mourner Prime, which had wrapped itself around an entire dreadnought, suddenly released it, recoiling as if struck by a force it couldn't comprehend. Oren spoke with urgency, "Admiral, human emotional spikes are destabilizing the Mourner Prime's psychic field. The children inside the vessel are generating a resonance, hope frequency." Dani felt the change too. The children began holding each other again, tiny hands gripping tightly, forming a circle instinctively, their small crying voices turning into a trembling chorus of hope, fear, and desperate longing to live. The sound wasn't loud, but it was real, alive, and it rippled through the ship like a heartbeat. The shadow creature shrieked, twisting wildly, its body unraveling as the emotional resonance spread through the corridor, and the Marines rallied behind Dani, stepping forward with renewed determination as if the children's fragile strength was pouring into their own hearts. Admiral Hale saw the sensor spike and shouted, All ships, synchronize fire with the resonance. Hit it now. The sky outside lit up with a massive storm of blue-white energy. The combined fire of human dreadnoughts slamming into the Mourner Prime with cosmic force, tearing huge pieces from its enormous shadow form, and the Prime screamed across the stars, causing the refugee ship to shudder violently as cracks raced across the walls. Inside, the inner shadow creature thrashed in agony, pieces of it evaporating like smoke touched by sunlight. Danny aimed again, tears streaming, voice shaking with rage and love as she shouted, "These kids survived your darkness. They are stronger than you." The creature lunged one last time in desperation, but the Marines fired together, and the blast tore through its core, ripping it apart in a wave of bursting shadows that dissolved into nothing. Silence followed. Heavy. Trembling. Then the children cried, not in fear, but in relief, and Danny hugged the nearest one, her voice breaking as she whispered, you're safe now." But the victory lasted only seconds. The ship groaned again, louder than before, as Admiral Hale shouted over the comm, "Danny. Marines. The Mourner Prime is not dead. It's morphing into its final form." And the lights across the corridor dimmed again. The real nightmare was about to begin. The warning from Admiral Hale had barely left the comms when the entire refugee ship twisted sideways with a violent jerk, throwing Marines and children across the corridor like ragdolls as every metal beam screamed under impossible pressure. And Danny barely managed to shield 2 kids with her body before slamming into the wall so hard that her vision exploded into white sparks. But she didn't have time to breathe because outside, through the shattered window panels, they saw something no living species had ever survived to describe. The Mourner Prime evolving, its colossal shadow body stretching across the stars like a living eclipse, tendrils spiraling into the void, swirling into a monstrous shape that made even the battle-hardened Marines freeze with instinctive terror. The Prime wasn't just an enemy anymore. It was a storm of pure despair, an ancient cosmic hunger twisting itself into final form, its dark core burning with stolen memories and consumed worlds. Its mind pressed against every human heart, whispering a single crushing idea: surrender. Inside the corridor, the lights blew out in a wave of bursting sparks, plunging everyone into choking darkness as the psychic assault slammed into them harder than ever, dragging up their deepest wounds, their most painful regrets, their most silent fears. One Marine collapsed, clawing at his helmet, sobbing as he saw the face of his daughter calling his name from a burning house. Another punched the floor, screaming for a father he never got to save. Danny felt her throat tighten as the voice of her dead brother returned, whispering, "You failed me, you always fail." Her fists shook, tears falling freely as she fought to stay conscious, fought to hear something, anything, besides the crushing storm of grief. The children began crying again, louder this time, their voices trembling with pure terror as the ship lurched sideways, metal tearing, alarms blaring uselessly. Danny pushed herself upright on shaking arms, forcing her mind to focus through the suffocating despair, and she crawled toward the children, grabbing them one by one, gathering them close even as the psychic pressure tried to break her ribs with invisible hands. "Look at me," she gasped, her voice cracking but fierce. "Look at me, not the darkness." But the children couldn't stop shaking. The psychic storm was too heavy, too violent, too cruel. And just when Danny felt her own strength slipping completely, one tiny voice broke through the chaos. The small boy, tears pouring down his cheeks, whispered, "Please, don't go. You said you wouldn't leave us." Those words cut through the psychic storm like a blade of light. Danny trembled, then screamed, not in fear, but in rage, pulling the child into her arms as she shouted into the darkness, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Her emotions exploded outward. Pain, love, anger, compassion, all mixing into a raw human force the mourners had no defense against. The psychic pressure wavered. For the first time, the darkness hesitated. The Marines felt it too. Their breathing steadied. Their hearts synced. Their fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into determination, into fire, into something the mourners couldn't corrupt. Hope. And as hope filled the corridor, the children, one by one, began reaching out, grabbing each other's hands again, forming the same trembling circle as before, but this time with louder cries, deeper emotion, stronger connection. Their voices overlapped, a chorus of desperate courage. Dani placed her hand in the circle. The Marines followed. And in that exact moment, the corridor lit up with a soft, warm glow. Not light from lamps, but light from human emotion itself. A bright pulse that rippled through the air like a heartbeat strong enough to shake the void. Outside, Admiral Hale saw it on sensors, a massive spike. A burst of emotional resonance so powerful it echoed through space in waves. The Mourner Prime recoiled, its colossal tendrils whipping backward as its core flickered violently like a dying star. It screamed, a soundless roar that made space ripple. Oren's voice cracked with shock. "Admiral, the resonance is destabilizing the Prime's existence." Hale slammed his fist into the console. "Lock onto the resonance. All ships fire." The battle fleet unleashed every remaining weapon. Beam cannons, fusion torpedoes, harmonic disruptors, and the sky outside detonated into a blinding storm of light as human firepower merged with the emotional resonance pulsing from the children and Marines. The blast struck the Prime's core, blowing massive chunks out of its shadow body, tearing it apart in a cascade of cosmic darkness that spiraled across the void. The entire corridor shook so violently that the refugee ship nearly split in half, but Dani held onto the kids, hugging them tightly as the shadow creature inside screamed its last, ripping apart into nothing but drifting smoke. For a heartbeat, there was silence, real silence. No psychic pressure, no whispers, no visions, nothing but the sound of children crying into the armor of the Marines who held them close. Dani pressed her forehead against the small boy's hair, whispering through tears, "You're safe. I swear it, you're safe." But Admiral Hale's voice suddenly cut through the comms, harsh and urgent. "Dani, listen carefully. The Prime isn't dead." Everyone froze. Hale continued, voice trembling with disbelief. "It's reforming. It's gathering everything it has for one final attack. One strong enough to wipe out the entire fleet." Dani's heart clenched. The Marines stiffened. The children whimpered. And then the lights around them flickered red as a deep alarm echoed through the dying corridors. The Mourner Prime was about to unleash its final, universe-shaking strike. Humanity had seconds left to survive. The moment Admiral Hale whispered, "Prepare for the final stand," the entire Ashfall corridor changed as if waking from a long nightmare. The shadows outside twisted violently, bleeding away from the shattered form of the Mourner Prime as it gathered its remaining energy into a massive sphere of black light pulsing with hatred. A dying sun made of pure despair ready to explode and erase every ship, every soul, every memory inside the corridor in one final strike. The human fleet shook under the rising pressure, hulls cracking, shields flickering weakly, reactors screaming in protest as the Prime's last emotional scream spread through space like a storm that wanted to crush the universe itself. Inside the refugee ship, the air changed, heavy, electric, suffocating, making Dani and the Marines stumble as the children cried and covered their ears, even though the sound wasn't physical. It was inside their hearts, tearing hope apart, trying to break them one last time. The walls warped inward, groaning, twisting like the ship was melting, and for a moment Dani felt something she hadn't felt since the fight began: doubt. What if they couldn't survive this? What if saving the children only delayed the inevitable? What if this was the end? But then the smallest child, the boy who kept reaching for her, the boy who kept pulling her back from the darkness, grabbed her hand again, his voice shaking but steady as he said, "You promised you wouldn't leave." And Dani's breath caught in her throat as she knelt in front of him, placing her forehead against his and whispering, "I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever." The corridor lights flickered weakly as the Prime's dying energy pulsed harder, tearing chunks of metal from the ship's hull, pulling gravity apart until the children floated helplessly into the air, crying, reaching for the Marines who clung to whatever they could grab as the ship tilted and spun. But Dani roared through the comm, "Grab the kids. Hold them tight." Marines, bruised and bleeding, pushed through the chaos, catching children one by one as the ship shook like a leaf in a hurricane. Outside, Admiral Hale saw the Prime's core swell to the size of a moon, its black light flickering violently, and he knew time was running out. If the Prime exploded, the entire corridor, maybe half the sector, would be wiped from existence. Hale's voice broke as he whispered, "Oren, prepare the Oblivion Pulse." The bridge went silent. Even Oren hesitated. "Admiral, that weapon is forbidden." It will destroy whatever remains of the corridor. Hale's jaw clenched, his voice fierce and trembling. If we don't fire it, there will be no corridor left to destroy. Back inside the refugee ship, Danny felt a strange warmth rising through the floor as the children clung to the Marines, whispering to each other, hugging each other, sharing their tiny fragile hope like a candle in total darkness. Suddenly the ship's sensors lit up inside Danny's helmet with a soft chime. Emotional resonance detected. She didn't understand what it meant until she realized the children weren't just holding on. They were generating something powerful, pure hope, pure emotion, connected together like a living shield. Outside, Admiral Hale saw the same spike on his sensors and gasped. The children, they are stabilizing the emotional field. The Prime lunged at the fleet, its dying energy swirling like a black storm. But for the first time its attack slowed, stumbling, weakening under the emotional resonance building from the human hearts inside the refugee ship. Oren's voice sharpened. Admiral, if we synchronize the pulse with the hope frequency, we can contain the explosion. Hale's voice cracked as he shouted, do it! Fire on my mark! The human dreadnoughts positioned themselves, forming a defensive circle around the refugee ship as the Prime gathered its last breath, its final weapon, its last scream of destruction. Danny hugged the children close as the ship shook violently, her own voice trembling as she whispered, hold on, babies, hold on, humanity is here. The children squeezed their eyes shut, holding each other, forming one last chain of hope that pushed through the darkness like a beam of warm light. The Mourner Prime screamed, its core erupting outward, an explosion of black fire that rushed toward the fleet like a tidal wave ready to erase everything. Admiral Hale raised his hand slowly, eyes burning, heart shaking, and roared, fire! The Oblivion pulse detonated. A blinding white light burst across the corridor, colliding with the black explosion in a storm of cosmic energy so violent that the stars themselves flickered. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no sight, no breath, as the pulse consumed the darkness, swallowing the Prime's power, folding it in on itself, crushing it until the black sun at the center imploded silently into pure ash-like particles. The ashfall corridor went quiet. For the first time in centuries. The darkness faded. The emotional pressure vanished. And the refugee ship drifted in silence as Danny slowly opened her eyes, her breath trembling as she looked around. The children were blinking, confused, alive. The Marines were exhausted, bruised, broken, but breathing. A moment later, Admiral Hale's voice cracked through the comm, shaking with emotion he couldn't hide. Marines, report. Danny lifted her head, tears falling freely as she whispered, the children, they're safe. The bridge of the flagship erupted with applause and sobs. Across the fleet, soldiers cried openly, hugging each other, pounding their fists against their chests. Humanity had survived the ashfall corridor. They had defeated the mourners. They had protected the innocent. And when the refugee ship emerged from the shadowed region into open space, the entire galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity's battle fleet escorted the children home, their shields glowing like guardians forged from light itself. No one laughed at humans ever again. No one mocked Earth. No one doubted their strength. Because on that day, the galaxy learned a truth they would remember for generations.